Hi, Disability History class. It's Saturday, January 7th, and we are beginning Module 3, which is called Citizenship, Inequality, and Disability in the Late 19th and Early 20th Century. All of the quizzes are in, all of your memoir assignments are in, and your discussion form is going great, so keep up the good work. Here are the learning objectives for this module. First, we will learn about various reform movements around disability and progressive era America. And the progressive era is generally considered the time period between about 1880 and 1920. Second, we'll learn about the eugenics movement and the whole concept of eugenics. And third, we'll learn about the origin of special education as a field. The overarching theme of this module is the ways in which laws, policies, and scientific practices contributed to developing public definitions of disabilities. It's a definition that was largely marked by discrimination and exclusion. Remember, the title of this module is Citizenship, Inequality, and Disability. The discrimination and exclusion of people with disabilities developed in certain ways. It wasn't just individual practices. Rather, it was the development of large social structures, legal policies, and practices that developed and enforced such discrimination. One major player in those legal and social policies was the new medical profession, as we learned a bit about last unit. And their role was not always, in fact, it was rarely helpful for people with disabilities. And this is one reason why the medical model of disabilities is so prominent in our thinking today and so damaging for people with disabilities. How did the historical development of the medical profession and other social and political structures lead to more inequality and marginalization for people with disabilities? What about citizenship and people with disabilities? How did the loss of civic rights and recognition happen? This is a good time to remember that this is a history class, a history of disabilities, and so we really want to pay attention to historical context and processes. History is not just about dates, but dates are important. Being a person with disabilities was very different in 1870 than it was in 1970. And one thing we'll learn in disability history is how the social context and policies changed for people with disabilities over time. The developing role of the medical profession, as I mentioned before, plays a really critical role in this. Something else to note. In her article that we read for this unit, the historian Adrienne Phelps-Coco offers a pretty good definition of disabilities. It's on the bottom of the first page of her article. She says there are two components to a definition of disabilities. One, having an ongoing physical or mental condition that society deems unusual. And two, facing discrimination and exclusion as the result of having this condition. The important point raised here is that disability is not just the condition, but it's also the way in which society treats that condition. And here's an example of that. I have a condition called nearsightedness. I wear glasses. I've been wearing them since I was about 10 years old. It's sort of a pain sometimes, and it costs money, and when I was younger, it made me really self-conscious. But my condition of nearsightedness has never led to discrimination or exclusion. So I would not say that I have a disability or that these glasses disable me in any way. Society has not made wearing glasses a condition that leads to discrimination or exclusion. So this definition is helpful to help us think about some of the other concepts we've talked about in discussion, for example, alcoholism, and also in last module's discussion, womanhood. Some of the characteristics of womanhood. Is that a disability? Depending on who and when. Okay, so what to watch for and read for this module. First, you'll see a short and chilling video about eugenics, the history of eugenics. Secondly, a short video on the history of special education by Dr. Brent Daigle, who has a really fun Southern accent and a cool jazz background to his lecture. Dr. Daigle's emphasis is on legal history and legal landmarks. So note especially his link between the history of African American legal oppression, famous case of Plessy versus Ferguson, and the liberalization, famous case of Brown versus the Board of Education, with the history of special education. How does the history of African American education and the history of special education parallel each other? Third, you're going to read Kim Nielsen's Chapter 6 and note the national fear about the defective. Remember, we're talking about civic issues here. And then Adrienne Phelps-Coco's great article on the ugly laws, and note especially the link between disability and economic dependency. And then fifth, an article by our friend Kim Nielsen on Helen Keller and the politics of civic fitness. Note especially Helen Keller's poignant, ironic attitude and lack of opportunities to consider herself as a person with disabilities. 6, Steve Selden's history of eugenics and this really wild history of how eugenics was taught through fairs, through community fairs. And those of you in education may be especially interested in and shocked by the story of Lita Hollingworth and gifted education. This is a good time to consider the link between eugenics, testing, and tracking in schools. And then finally, an article by the best historian of special education, Robert Osgood, on how the great neighboring state of Indiana played a central role in eugenic influences. And here again, think about the origin of tracking, or what educators defined as superior and inferior stocks of people, and how that maybe continues to play in educational processes today. Assignments that are due after this module: discussion forum, 3 questions. Module 3 quiz, like the earlier one, open book, untimed, but there are only 5 questions here. And third, your 2 proposals. Remember the proposals for the digital resource project and your historical research project, research assignment. Submit those by Tuesday at 11:59. All right, hope you're well. See ya.